Admiral Ross tries his first glass of Romulan ale. Garrick was a gardener on Romulus. And Julian is a man who loves secrets, while Sloane is a man of secrets. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today, we're doing a review of Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 16. Checks notes for pronunciation guide. Enter Arma Enim Sela Legolas. Thank you to Eve England for providing that. This was written by the legendary Ronald D. Moore, directed by our good pal, also a legend in his own right, David Livingston. This was March 3rd, 1999, 3399. How are you today, Sirach Lofton?
Excellent. Great episode.
That's been my biggest stress for the last 3 or 4 weeks, is knowing that this episode is coming up and I have no idea how to pronounce all that Latin. But luckily, our good pal and associate producer, Eve England, sent in a couple nights ago a pronunciation guide for it.
I mean, it's easy. It's Enter Armin Shimmerman's
Legolas. Perfect. Enter Sandman Shimmerman Legolas. We got it.
Yeah. But, they refer to it in the episode, which is great because they didn't. Yeah. Sometimes they use these titles and they don't actually give you the title in the episode. But this one, they referred to it and then kind of tell you where the quote's coming from. I forgot. It was like
it was Cicero.
Cicero, that's right.
Yeah. Merchant of Venice, was it? No. I think that's
in time of war, the law falls silent.
Exactly. So I think basically it's like all is fair in love and war, but specifically in war, basically, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting concepts that this episode really deals with pretty head on, which is why it's so interesting because one of the things that Deep Space Nine does a good job of is questioning what measures have to be taken in order to basically secure victory for the Federation or for, protecting the most amount of life or preserving this kind of, democratic type of free society that the Federation believes in. So, we saw that with Cisco and Garrick in that episode where he really does some kind of,
in the pale moonlight. Woo!
Yeah, you can't ever forget that episode because it does deal with similar subject matter, which is, that to what extent do you, bend rules, question morality? Basically, at what point are you becoming the thing that you're trying to, oppose? Right. And that's really one of the things that's actually the walking the fine line of those kinds of decisions and making, military decisions and having to, people's lives in your hand. And what do you do to preserve it?
Yeah, that's true. It seems as though when you were talking about that just now, it made me think that in the Next Generation, Captain Picard was very much the guy that would say that we cannot change what makes us human. Otherwise, we're no better than them. Over and over, that was always kind of the theme, right? Deep Space Nine goes a little darker and says, well, the end justifies the means, right? And Sloane even says, like, look, I'll spare you the end justifies the means speech, and you spare me the we must do what's right speech. And I was like, that's so good, because that's usually an entire scene in most episodes of shows like this.
That's great writing to me, too. When I heard that, I wrote that line in my notes as well. And that's just Ron Moore taking the thing that, he squeezes it down and condenses it to just that line. So it's like, look, I'm not going to go through the whole, this is who's right, who's wrong, because we're not playing that game right now. We're playing a game where you don't have any options because I've manipulated the circumstances or events so that you only have one choice, which is to cooperate with me and do what needs to be done. So that's kind of the other aspect of knowing a bigger agenda
Hmm.
and having more information about things, right? Because I really love that about this episode. You see that Sloan had other people in the room, right? It wasn't just him. It looks like he's just there for Bashir, and Bashir is his guy, and it's all about Bashir. But it's also, he's got a guy over there, he's got a guy over there, he's got several strings moving around that Bashir has no idea are moving around.
Hmm.
And to
And
me,
who
that was
knows if
one of the
he's even
beauties.
in
Yeah,
if he's even
yeah,
in charge of this? We don't even know the power structure. That's why there's so many twists and turns in this episode, and it kind of asks more questions than it answers. And I think that's why the fans like this one. I mean, first of all, because it's the second episode that introduces Section 31. And it kind of opens up. It's kind of like the Tal Shiar, or with the Romulans, but the Tal Shiar is kind of like their spy agency, but they kind of work hand in hand with the Romulan Star Empire government. Same thing with the Cardassians and the Obsidian Order. That's their spy agency, and they kind of work hand in hand. But the Federation doesn't want to admit. They want to act like their hands are clean, and they're like, no, we don't work with Section 31. We fight them. But then it turns out that some of the officers, like Bashir, might fight Section 31, but the Federation itself does not. Behind closed doors, they're like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Keep up the good work, guys.
yeah. And you know, one of the things that I kind of did a little research on as far as William Sadler's part into this role.
Yeah, let's get into this guy.
Yeah, because he's so amazing, and he's fantastic in this episode. But one of the things that he mentions, aside from the fact that just this character was so interesting to him because it was an introduction of these kinds of ideas and the this covert organization really interests him because of what was happening in the headlines. And what he mentioned was Oliver North and the Iran Contra scandal, which was what he says was in the headlines at the time. And that makes sense as far as the kind of um, origin of a story like Section 31,
Yeah.
because Oliver North obviously being involved with this whole drug smuggling, that's kind of this black operation that's happening where the government is admitted to in court, at least through the testimony of Oliver North, that there was this whole uh, you know drug distribution enterprise happening, courtesy of the U.S. military, right? And it was one of those things where everybody was looking the other way, and
See,
it
I
just
didn't know
showed.
too much about that stuff. That's really interesting. So basically, the U.S. military was aware of it, but looking the other way because what?
They were doing more than just aware of it; they were transporting it on planes. They were
Wait a
actually.
minute. Corruption within the US government? I don't buy it. Boy, this
I
sounds
know,
like
right? I
propaganda to
know.
me.
But this was the drug operation, and that it was what Sadler was referring to was the fact that Ronald Reagan was president, and he had this image of this very clean kind of moral person who was able to talk to the people and convince them about morality, talking about you know uh, tearing down communism and the Berlin Wall and all of these kinds of things, where it was like about righteousness and good things happening in the world. And while at the same time he stands for that, behind closed doors were these covert operations to run drugs and weapons and all of this other stuff that was happening. So um, that was kind of the headline that
Wow.
startled the nation, right? So when Oliver North was testifying, these kinds of facts surfaced, and it startled the nation because they were realized, wait a minute, the government that we thought was out here for benevolence and doing the most good in the world is actually involved in these other aspects of kind of not good activities. And so it was a wake up call about the kind of activities that could go on
Mm-hmm.
that are not on the books, that are not, even probably known about by certain members of the government itself, right? It's so black operations that some people may not even know about it.
Well,
And
that's
I
why in
think that's
Star
what,
Trek
yeah,
Discovery they have the badge that tells you I'm Section
yeah,
31. Remember that
right. I'm undercover.
one? I'm in the secret group.
I'm hiding
Yeah.
in plain sight.
Sounds like Ronald Reagan should have taken his wife's advice, right? His wife's the just say no, but he didn't. He said just say
No.
just whatever. Just go do it.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that. That was, I think, the beginning. But obviously, we've had many other things that have happened since that kind of confirms people's suspicion that there's all kinds of activities that are nefarious going on at high
Mm-hmm.
levels, especially with the kinds of apparatus that are available to people now through the advent of the internet and all of these other mechanisms that could be used for espionage. So yeah,
Well,
we've
that could be, but we all know the government would never spy on us, right?
right,
I mean, that's
never,
not
nobody.
that's not something they
That's
would use the internet
right,
for. But anyway, you
right.
were saying?
There's rights that are protected,
Yeah,
but
way I got rights. When I scrolled through 50 pages on Facebook and just said I agree, I'm sure I wasn't signing away my rights there without reading.
no, there was no fine print. Um, but yeah, so that's what they deal with in this episode, which I love. I think um, it's interesting because Starfleet does have this, patina of just, goodness and benevolence. And that's one of the things that, appeals to people about it is, oh, this force for good, right? That's out in the universe for exploration and first contact and development and sharing the technologies and wealth of abundance of the things that we've learned over the courses of our civilizations, right? And what the greatness that we've accumulated through technologies and alliances. But at the same time, you know, when you see episodes like this, it reminds you that there are certain measures and steps that are taken in order to protect that are outside of the parameters of these same ideals that it's trying to live up to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, Sirach, there's nothing that I and the fans love better than when you drop some historical knowledge on us. Usually it's more like super distant history or biblical stuff, but even just 80s, I'm like, tell me more. All I remember from the 80s is like Run TMC, I don't know, and music, and 49ers Super Bowls. But that's really cool. That's really good stuff. And it's true, like so many of these good, and of course Ronald D. Moore is the perfect guy to write this stuff, right?
Right.
So many good stories, throughout the ages have come from like the secret societies or the spy agencies or whatever. And so Star Trek is just ripe for this. Of course, we want there to be a secret agency, a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge thing that kind of works in the gray areas of Starfleet and the betterment of the Federation. It's ripe for that because Starfleet and the Federation are supposed to be like pristine, like they're supposed to be the clean, benevolent, we do what's right, and that's why we win. But yeah, sometimes I don't want to say you got to cheat, but like sometimes even the most pristine of federations or companies or countries or galactic planets or whatever it is, in order for them to stay on top, they're going to have to fudge on the rules. And some of them, like the Cardassians and Romulans, are like, yeah, whatever. We're not even worried about that. And others like the Klingons are like, we will never, we have honor, and then and then the Federation is kind of like, well, we'll try not to, but
we just won't admit it.
yeah, it's like, hey, what do you want us to do? Die? No, we got to do something. So it's really cool because I do think that Star Trek and the Federation is like, a prime candidate for stories like this. And I think that's why it catches our attention so much, is because it almost feels like this should have been introduced a long time ago. It's perfect for it, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is that Ron Moore takes it and he tells us in the dialogue that this is not a new concept. That's why he brings it back to Caesar and Rome, and he talks about this quote, this Latin quote about it in times of war. So the idea is old. It's an ancient idea that, hey, sometimes when it's wartime, the rules don't apply anymore. There's no more rules. We're gonna have to kind of bend rules around here in order to get our goals accomplished. And that's the brilliance of Ronald Moore in this particular episode, because he's taking this old concept, taking current headlines, which is the whole Iran-Contra deal, and mixing it all together in this future setting, which is the beauty of Star Trek. You get to place concepts of today's headlines and things that we battle with as societies, and place it into a different context, into the future, which lets you perceive it and look at it from kind of a different lens, and it's not so close to you. And when you look at it this lens, I thought William Sadler had amazing performances in this episode. Totally. Specifically, the one in context to our discussion now is the one at the end when he's sitting there and he's like, "Hey, you're a good guy, Bashir. We need good people like you. We're protecting you."
He said Section 31 exists because of people like you, because people like you need to be protected, or something like that.
Yeah,
which is great.
It's great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, William Sadler, obviously he plays Death on Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. That's who I see when I'm watching this. But he's got a laundry list, on IMDb that just goes forever, and so many great credits, including one by the aforementioned Eve England. She'll be mentioning during our free-for-all, so everybody stay tuned for that one. She sent in a pretty interesting thing. But when you were talking about like how the rules kind of go out the door in war, I was thinking like, so the Ferengi have the rules of acquisition, right? Garrick, we coined the phrase, he's got the rules of obfuscation, which is great for him. So what are the rules of war? Is that the rules of eradication, or what are we going to say? Because Sisko certainly has his own rules of eradication. Garrick certainly does. William Sadler does. Admiral Ross clearly does, where they're kind of, they all kind of have their own little mottos that they go by, which is always do what's right, except when you can't. Then do what you got to do.
But then, everybody had that a kind of intent almost to some degree in this episode, with the exception of Bashir, who was kind of being used as a pawn throughout the episode. But so he was the least aware of what was happening, and and how he was being used.
It seemed like they were all being pawns out there. It was like a pawn cocktail.
I'm not touching that one, but the way that, like, when you find out that all the characters kind of are in some higher level of know, like, actually, as I watched this episode, I replayed it in my head, the scene with Sisko, and I was thinking, does Sisko also know?
Yeah.
Yeah, like did Cisco also know that Bashir was going to be used in this kind of a way? Because it was because when once Admiral Ross was aware, I was aware that he knew. Then I was
Mhm.
thinking, well, did he brief Cisco in on it? Because Cisco was acting like, hey, we have to figure out what this Section 31 guy is up to because he's
Right.
not supposed to be around
But
here,
that's what Admiral Ross was saying too. So you're right. But they never actually
Right.
gave us the answer to that question.
Right. Was Cisco played by Admiral Ross, or was he in on it and playing Bashir? That would be one of the
I think we're
questions.
supposed to assume that Cisco doesn't know because we like to look at Cisco as space dad, like Cisco would never go along with that. Well, the one time he did with Garrick Pale Moonlight, whatever.
but
But but he
but
would
other than
never
that,
openly lie to Julian Bashir.
by the way, wasn't that a Romulan senator that Cisco did in that
Yes.
episode
Yeah,
in the
what was
Pale
his
Moonlight?
name? Senator I can't remember. This one in today's episode was Senator Kretak. Do
Yeah.
you remember Senator Kretak? She was in a couple of episodes, a dozen
No,
episodes
I
ago.
love the Romulan senators. Actually, when I saw this senator that they had, I thought how the consistency of how these Romulan senators are played, even forward onto Saru and his interest in Discovery, the woman that plays that Romulan senator.
Interesting, yeah. I think she's
Um,
Vulcan, but
is she
whatever,
Vulcan?
same thing. Who
They're
knows
very
anymore?
similar, but to me, the aura is very
Yeah,
similar to. It's very consistent when you watch how this woman played the Romulan senator. So I just really liked just the whole concept of like, was Cisco in on it or was he not? And that was one of the
Mhm.
things that kind of stood out to me a little bit. The other thing that stood out to me was the Section 31 outfit. That the whole black, there was that black leather kind of outfit that he was wearing. I was thinking,
Black
wow,
Ops.
right, this is the beginning of that style because we obviously saw Section 31 in other iterations now in the new shows, and they've stayed true to that kind of black, dark leather, outfits for their operation, which is kind of cool because you see the beginnings of it here in this episode, which means Bob Blackman creates a style that and a organization that eventually becomes something that's spun off into other ways.
That reminds me, everybody at home, what's the punk band that sings Black Leather back in the day? Was it The Damned? It's a great song, Black Leather. Check it out. I think it's The Damned, but who knows anymore. So we're gonna hit a break. Actually, covered by Guns N' Roses right here.
Oh,
That's
wow.
probably why I know it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I know from the '80s is Guns N' Roses and sports stuff. And that was just the end. Okay, so we got to hit our break really quickly, but I do want to talk a bit more about Kretak and Koval, this guy, the Romulan guy, the tall guy, and all kinds of other fun stuff. We will be right back with all that good stuff on the seventh rule